Hey everybody, this is Dr. Adam Rinde. Welcome to episode 111 of the One Thing podcast. In this episode, I welcome on Gillian Ehrlich, who is from Neuroveda Health in Seattle, Washington. She is a doctorate in clinical nursing, and she specializes in complex chronic illness. She has a very interesting background and approach to medicine. Her background in Ayurvedic combined with conventional training in nursing fuses with further training in functional and integrative medicine to put together a really interesting clinical approach to dealing with complex illness. In her practice, she includes very advanced therapies such as ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, plasmapheresis, and also IV therapies. She deals with disorders such as fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, POTS, long COVID, mast cell activation syndrome, and many other complex disorders such as PTSD. When you listen to her speak, you really get a sense that she's a true healer that incorporates all facets of science and psychology and lifestyle, and she really truly is integrated in who she is as a person. I got the chance to visit her clinic a few years ago, and we've become colleagues after that visit, and I really enjoyed getting a chance to chat with her and get to know her further, and I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. So without further ado, welcome to the next episode of the One Thing podcast. Gillian, welcome to the One Thing podcast. It's so great to reconnect with you again.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's nice to see you.
You're welcome. Yeah. Last time I met with you, you were so kind to invite me over to take a tour of your clinic, and I was blown away by your practice.
Thanks.
And also just who you are and how well you've integrated so many different aspects of medicine in your journey. So I've been wanting to interview you for quite some time. So thanks for making the time.
Absolutely. My pleasure. My pleasure.
Yeah. So the few things that I'd love to kind of get into before we talk more about your current practice and approaches and philosophies is just hearing about some of your early influences. You have kind of a unique story about back in the day when you were getting inspired to become a healthcare provider. And can you share with us some of the early influences in your life? And just I know there's one special person that I'd love to hear more about.
Yes. So I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio in the late 70s and early 80s. And I don't know, how much folks know about Cleveland, but we call it in Ohio kind of the mistake on the lake, or like the armpit of Ohio. And in 1969, the Cuyahoga River, which is the central river through the city of Cleveland, actually caught on fire. There was so much pollution and oil draining into that river that, literally the river caught on fire. And so I grew up in the suburbs of Cleveland. It's also known as the city of beautiful homes. Rockefeller lived there. Millionaire's Row was there. Those are not the houses I grew up in, but so there are some really beautiful aspects of Cleveland and some very polluted aspects. And I was a kid who was raised on like Burger King, McDonald's, mac and cheese. We ate at home a lot. But it was the 80s. And so it was a really standard American diet fare. And when I looked around me, a lot of the adults kind of looked tired. Everybody was working. And I thought, God, what am I going to do with my life? And then in 10th grade, this is what you're referring to. In 10th grade, I had a teacher for my health class whose name was Jane Esselstyn. And Jane is the daughter of Caldwell Esselstyn, who's a cardiologist at the Cleveland Clinic, and he was in the movie Forks Over Knives, and he does a lot of vegan eating. And Jane and her family, her brother Rip is Engine 3 diet. And so
Mm-hmm.
they've really kind of taken this and run. But in the late 80s, when Jane was my health high school teacher, it was how she was in the world that I was like, okay, I can do that. She taught for an outdoor education program called Outward Bound, which I ended up teaching for about 6 or 7 years. Out here, she taught in North Carolina. I taught out here in Washington State. I was mostly in boats. And the other thing that I'll say that I think is relevant to my early story is that I have always we see a lot of hypermobile patients and patients with something called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome in our clinic.
Yeah.
And there's this triad with dysautonomias like POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, and mast cell activation syndrome. That's the original triad. And of course, now we've expanded it to be connected to these other conditions like an increased risk for autoimmune disease and long COVID or EBV or Epstein-Barr virus or kind of chronic infections. And so I was actually a really hypermobile kid. I still am. I have
okay. Yeah.
Hopefully that's not too gross.
Score. Yeah.
A Beighton score of 8 out of 9. And so I was a kid who hid in the woods instead of running the mile in 6th grade. And so I just, it was hard for me to kind of find my place in the world. And so so meeting Jane Esselstyn and seeing her approach to just life in general, I was amazed. And then working with Outward Bound and being out here in Washington State, where there was a lot of boating and kayaking and rowing that I could do, I found that rowing is the perfect exercise for folks with dysautonomia. You use a lot of core strength. You use a lot of arms and legs, and it's not a heroic sort of, you're not pounding on your body, and you're not even standing the whole time you're sitting. So so those things kind of really really opened up the world for me. And I got really interested in how we embody, how we live, what is the point of life. I did a senior speech on, we all had to do a speech to the school our senior year in high school, and I did mine on the meaning of life. I've always been that kind of a kid.
Yeah.
I made a joke, and out of 500 people, 2 laughed, and everybody else was dead silent. So high school's weird.
You were ahead of your time.
Maybe that's the way to say it nicely. Besides,
that's how I look at it.
Thank you. But so with these early experiences, and then kind of coming out to Washington State and being involved with Outward Bound and really kind of finding my place, I was really interested in health. It seems like if our health is good, or if our health is clear, if our health is an obstacle, then our perception is obstructed. And if our perception is obstructed, then we're not kind of living this the clearest life that we can live. And so I was really interested in health. I thought about medical school, but it didn't look like there was a lot of health involved there. It looked like you don't get to sleep and you can't eat, and you're, running around inside the basements of hospitals a lot. And that's not necessarily the life that I thought would serve me best. And so I did. I went into outdoor leadership for a long time. I studied regenerative agriculture and farming. I worked on a community-supported agriculture farm in Southwest Ohio. We pulled 1,000 pounds of garlic out of the ground. I learned a lot about soil chemistry. I learned a lot about mushrooms. That's what I studied when I came out to Washington State initially when I was 19. And it took a long time for me. It wasn't until, at the end of all of that, farming and outdoor education, and I did a lot of sailing. I sailed from Hawaii. I mean, these are all good stories, right? So I sailed from Hawaii to San Diego on a 47-foot catch, a 47-foot boat with 3 friends. It was a job. I was hired to do a boat delivery for a guy who was in the Navy, who had his boat stationed in Pearl Harbor. So we sailed out of Pearl Harbor and then 3 weeks later made landfall in San Diego.
Amazing.
So it was really fun. I feel like I did my retirement in reverse, which means I probably will never be able to retire now. But I had kind of all these adventures, and at the end, kind of towards the middle end of this, another childhood friend, Anisha Dervey, who's a fantastic clinician, acupuncturist at the University of Miami in their Integrative Osher Center. So Anisha and I had been friends since fourth grade, and she started taking me to classes, Ayurvedic classes, with Dr. Vasant Lad down in Albuquerque. So I'd go to visit her, and I learned about Ayurvedic medicine, and I used it with my Hour Bound students, and I thought, wow, this is like really effective. And it was the most effective tool that I had come across for how to understand people and how to work with people.
Right.
And so I decided if I was using a weekend workshop's worth of information and it was changing my life, I couldn't imagine what a year of studying with Dr. Ladd could offer. And so I did that in 2000 and 2001. And by the time I left the Ayurvedic Institute in 2001, I thought, this has to be our common ground in Western medicine. We need this insight of Ayurveda. And so the last 24 years now, 23 years, have really been trying to put that into practice. And I spent a lot of years working with underserved here in Seattle in a hospital setting on a med tele floor as a cardiology nurse. Again, there's, lots of other things that I've done. But eventually that was not enough. And I continued my studies in Ayurveda. I went back for my nurse practitioner in the University of Washington family nurse practitioner program and graduated. I got my master's in 2010 and my doctorate in 2011. I did, as my capstone project was completing the first survey of integrative clinicians at academic health centers for the way they practice and the patients that they see. And we published those results in 2013 in the Family Practice Journal. And it was the first study that showed about 30% of clinicians at that time, so these are NPs, PAs, MDs, and DOs, but at academic health centers had 30% had training in functional medicine. So it was really looking at how pervasive this training was already, that was in 2009 we did the survey. So
interesting.
Yeah.
Well, your list of people who have influenced you are like legends. So, people coming from, people who, they're right up there in the encyclopedia of, the names and the influences are right up there in the, kind of the top tier of people who you think of and the names you think of for these professions. And it's just interesting. You seem, with your training and your personality and your background, a kind of a pioneering type person. And then you kind of plugged yourself into academia and kind of the conventional world. Were you thinking you were going to change things from inside, change the system from the inside world, or what was your thinking in the beginning? Was it just kind of like, I need to get some experience, or were you really thinking that you were going to bring this medicine to the the hallways of the Ivy Tower of
that was when I left the Ayurvedic Institute in 2001. I was like, I am going to make change from the inside, and I'm going to go this conventional path so that I understand the language, just like when Rigoberta Menchú learned Spanish in order to kind of talk and communicate with the system in order to be able to change it. That was my idea. And I don't know, I can't tell what I've achieved in that department, but I have certainly tried. And it is so, thank you for, you're so kind with your words. So thank you. And I really have been very blessed and very humbled by the people that I've been able to be mentored by. And that includes Keisha Ewers, who's a nurse practitioner out here, who's just brilliant, and Dr. Eileen Ruhoy, who's an integrative neurologist, Arthi Chandra, was at Swedish in primary care for a zillion years. And I have been so blessed. And, with that blessing, it does for me feel like it comes with the responsibility to give back. And I tried working, I was at Swedish, which is one of our big primary care clinic systems. There's 19 primary care clinics that Swedish runs here in Seattle. And I tried working at Harborview. I was in their medical respite program, caring for homeless adults with acute medical needs for 4 years, and it's Swedish for 7. And I really tried to stay in those systems, but there was really no place for Ayurveda in those systems. And Swedish, I was doing some Ayurvedic medicine, but the way that the visits were structured, I was getting notices from insurance companies saying you're spending too long with patients,
Right.
and you consider yourself on notice. And so it really, there are risks, and I wanted to be able to continue my practice. So eventually I've now kind of come to this practice as it is, Neuroveda Health. And it's great because I can kind of do anything I want, and we've really built a team here that I feel is positive and energetic and enthusiastic about truly helping patients. And sometimes that means helping a patient with Alzheimer's figure out where their PET scan is going to be, ordered by another clinician, or figure out. I have another patient with slowly progressive dementia whose neurologist ordered her an MRI, and she was worried about whether it had contrast or not with it. And I had, so we'll often do that work for patients. But I also feel like we can offer some really innovative treatments. And that part is really fun, just like sitting with somebody and thinking about like, okay, so what would help you?
Yeah. I mean, and I want to get into this in just a bit here, but I mean, I think the fascinating part about your practice that, it's like when I'm in a complex scenario with a patient and, we've done a lot of various things, I'll think, I wish I had this modality here, and then I go over to your clinic and it's there. And it's like it's like, okay, well, here we go. This is the across the bridge extension of
Yeah.
what I was looking for in a clinic. But it's fascinating. I want to get into that, but first, philosophically, I want, just listening to you speak, and I'm thinking about being on the other side, being like a patient in your presence.
Mhm.
And, there's like there's sort of like a mythological kind of figure that, you're sitting in front of a doctor or a healthcare provider or a healer or whatever. And, I wonder, I'm just curious. I mean, in maybe you're not comfortable talking about this, but I'd love to hear what some of your patients have said about being your patient, what that's
Mhm.
like, because I have my own sense of like, wow, like if I was if I was afraid or scared for my health, or, kind of feeling like I was out of hope, like being in front of you would be like, it would feel like, like a sense of power comes through. But I would love to hear what your patients have said about you.
It's a great question. So I have a really strong belief that part of my role, so let me see, where do I want to start this answer? I have a really strong belief, number one, that we are at our best when we are most ourselves.
Love
So
that.
in the Western world, there's always like, you're always trying to be somebody else, right? We're always like dressing up to be like, um, to be like Michael Jordan or Shaquille O'Neal, or we're always dressing up to be like a superhero, or we always want to look like J-Lo, or we have such obsession with our celebrities, and we have so much obsession even in our medical system with averages, right? So, the equivalent to that sort of is like, we all want the same blood level labs. We all want the same BMI. We all want the same, we're trying to get within this like realm that we call normal. And I would say, in from the Ayurvedic perspective, all of us are going to have different skill sets in our bodies and our minds and our spirits and our emotional capacity. And so the best thing for every person is just to be more you. I don't
Mm,
want you to be average. I don't want you to be normal. I want you to be you. And if a person is more you, then it's better. And there's no, and so part of when I sit with patients, it's kind of like I want to just see things as they are. And that's the gift for me, is bearing witness to all these, like this multiplicity of like ways to be human.
Mm-hmm.
And that is part of the magic for me.
Yeah.
So, this is not totally altruistic care I offer. This is like, I am in it to like see how amazing humans are and how different we can be. So that's one aspect, I think, of sitting with me. And I do think that patients feel that. So I had a patient, I had a trans patient once who came in. I saw their, I can't remember if it was like, they'd sent me like a Facebook post or something that they had, or they sent it to the clinic, like, look what I'm doing, or something like that. And I realized that this person had transitioned their pronouns, and they came in and I was like, I am so sorry. When did you transition your pronouns? I apologize that I was not aware. And they said to me like, oh, 9 months ago, but it didn't really seem to matter because our care is not predicated on my gender being one or the other. And it was like the greatest honor in terms of like, they didn't feel pigeonholed by
Right.
me. They didn't feel like they had to stake their claim. I mean,
Sure.
I do want to know when people transition their pronouns, and I do want to be using the appropriate pronouns and names or whatever. But it's, I was like,
They,
okay, you
yeah,
are
they
like, we
felt
are a pillar
seen.
of light.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they
And
were
so,
seen regardless of like
yeah.
they were seen by you.
Yeah. So I want that always to be the case. And then the second thing that I would say is that, with patients sitting with me, is I think I see my role a lot as teaching. My hope is that we learn together about who you are and what's best for you in the world. And often we can figure out, a couple keys that really unlock your health for you. And so
Mm-hmm.
we want to figure out what those are. And so learning is a big part of, I feel like, being a patient of mine. Obviously, I talk a lot, probably too much sometimes, but and so and I think it's true that we only learn if we're relaxed. If we're really scared, it's really hard to learn. So I constantly am trying to figure out how to help patients relax and feel comfortable and safe and like they have a companion in the visit. And so sometimes I swear or tell dirty jokes, or, you
Yeah.
know, we constantly, I have some patients who have a lot of trauma and a lot of fear, and as it's appropriate, we'll try to make jokes, because I think it's important that if you're laughing, then you can breathe, then your parasympathetic nervous system can activate, and then you can learn.
Oh
And
yeah.
a lot of resource to come here. We are a cash pay clinic, and so I want people to walk away with both a sense of feeling how they need to feel to be themselves, as well as the information about what they can do in their daily life, or what kind of procedural, diagnostic, or treatments we're going to initiate in order to help their health shift.
It's amazing. Well, that definitely helps, and sort of what I expected, and especially like with the Ayurvedic training,
Mm-hmm.
that's really what it's about. It's like finding your true self and running the program of yourself.
Yes,
Not
exactly.
running the program of something you're
Yeah.
not.
Yeah. And this is, and I love functional medicine and I use it a ton, but I will say that, like, when I've been to functional medicine conferences and we sit around a table, everybody's like, and I don't want gluten and I don't want dairy and I
Yeah.
don't, and I'll have this, and then the last big Ayurvedic Sangha potluck we had in Seattle before the pandemic, actually, it was like the first 8 people brought desserts.
Yeah.
Like, I was like, oh, this is what it feels like to be an Ayurvedic practitioner. It's like, life is hard enough. Let's find some sweetness. Let's get some good spices in there for digestion, but let's enjoy.
Have
And so
some naan.
have some naan and some ladu. Do you know ladu? Ladu are like
Mm,
any little ball shaped treat, but
okay.
that's what I often recommend for like pregnant or lactating patients in the night, or if you need food
Okay.
in the night. And it's like um, nut butters with seeds, so
Mm,
protein, and then cinnamon and cardamom and ginger for digestion,
yeah.
uh, and sunflower seeds and sesame seeds, and yeah,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. It
those.
reminds me. I
Yeah.
I used to have a student that was when I was an attending at Bastyr that she was from India, and she would
Huh?
prescribe the most delectable treats for
Oh,
insomnia.
yes. Yes. Yes, exactly.
And she was a popular student clinician.
I feel like I could use that right now here in this fall season.
Right.
Yum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, good. Well, let's kind of go into a little bit of Neuroveda Health, and
Mhm.
you're you're doing a lot of really advanced things, and you've looked at this world of complex chronic illness, and seeing people on the with the triad, as you mentioned earlier.
Mhm.
And then you're also able to help people who are looking more for you know they're healthy and trying to prevent disease, or they have their mind on kind of like optimizing their health. So, and you're actually able to serve all communities. So talk about how you made that work.
Yeah. The truth of it is, the way that I see it is that complex disease, complex health issues or complex disease is on the same spectrum as longevity, right?
Hmm.
Aging is really just an issue of oxidative stress, which is exactly what complex and chronic
Mm,
disease are. And so when we're addressing either of those, we can use similar mechanisms. Not obviously not always the same. I'm not going to give midodrine for aging the way I would give midodrine or fludrocortisone for POTS.
right.
Um, but a lot of it is trying to unwind these processes that have gotten started and are tend to gain momentum. And so, and what I would say is that because our practice a lot is rooted in Ayurveda, there is an Ayurvedic procedure called Pancha Karma, which Pancha means 5, Karma means actions of detoxification.
Hmm.
And this is a 10,000 plus year old system for essentially doing just that, backing up the oxidative stress levels. And traditionally, like if you go to India, you can get this done in India and Bali and Thailand and all over Southeast Asia. You can get this done in the US and Europe, many places. If you go to Southeast Asia, often it's a month, like especially in Kerala, there's a lot of Panchakarma. Vidyagram is one great place. And it's often like you can even go for a month, like 10 to
Right.
30 days. And they'll serve you food every day and do yoga or movement practices. And then this body work, these oil massages, and all these different treatments. And in the US, often the most common cadence is that you do an intake, you oleate internally with ghee or coconut oil. Then, when your body is prepared, you've done your purva karma, your preparation, you come in for your actual treatments. And then it's 3.5 days, 3.5 hours each day on the Ayurvedic table for
Mm.
5 days. So you oleate the outside, you put oil in the ears, oil in the nose, that's called nasya. You do these specialized treatments, and then you do an elimination. And some form of elimination is most typically like drinking castor oil or warm sesame oil, herbal medicated enemas, which some
Okay.
people are like, no problem. And some people are like, not in a million years.
Yeah.
So, we're always going to customize for the individual patient. But panchakarma can be really helpful for deep disease. I've had a patient with MS get up off the table and say that's the least amount of pain I've had in 20 years.
Wow.
And it can be really helpful for longevity. And I recommend everybody for clarification, do panchakarma every year. I find that it corrects all my cravings. So when I start to like mindlessly eat, I think, oh, it's time for panchakarma.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. It's like very tonifying. Um,
Mhm. And
okay.
so with this panchakarma in mind, we've put together, we've added all of the Western treatments as well. So the idea is that for clinicians like yourself, as you're sitting in your clinic and you think, oh my gosh, I've got this person and they're kind of stuck. What can they do, or where can they go, or how can they access these therapies? We've put together these programs. We've called them the Executive Longevity Program, like it's just like ELP or ELP, as in we can help you. But I don't know about the name. But the idea is that people can come in from wherever, and patients can self-refer, or clinicians can refer their clients or their patients. And then patients can come and we will do a 90-minute intake. And then we set up a program for 3 to 21 days of services. And those services, it's kind of modeled on that Pancha Karma style. Not everybody's obviously doing enemas or drinking castor oil, but the Ayurvedic body work, the Abhyanga oil massage, the Shirodhara, which is a warm stream of oil on the forehead, Nasya oil, tuning fork cupping. So there is some body work that can be involved. And then that can be partnered with plasmapheresis, plasmapheresis is a needle in each arm, and it actually pulls out the blood, centripetally spins it and pulls out the plasma. So for deep autoimmune disease, it can be really helpful for essentially removing those antibodies. So then these other services can kind of get in there. We also offer IVIG in clinic. We offer stem cells. We can harvest, we can bank, we can infuse via an IV, or Dr. Carly Squires, our naturopath, can do joint injections, and she's brilliant. So she can do injections with stem cells, but also with prolotherapy, PRP, ozone. We have an IV lounge. People can do NAD. We have mitochondrial IVs. We have Myers cocktails and fluids and BCAAs for performance or athletic support, carnitine and acetylcysteine, all different sorts of IV therapies. And then we also partnered all of this with the ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. So if you've been sick for long enough, often, life can kind of feel like a drag, and you can have a lot of anxiety. There's, a lot of folks with complex and chronic disease, and a lot of folks who are aging or facing mortality or comorbidities in any fashion can sometimes benefit from ketamine-assisted psychotherapy to help both with as a rite of passage and also as pain relief. Mm-hmm. So the whole idea is that we will custom put together, what we are doing is custom putting together programs for patients so that they can fly in, they can spend a week with us or spend 5 days with us, get some of these treatments done, and hopefully be moved in their health to then head back so that their clinicians can then kind of pick up the baton with them in a different spot.
I see. So it's almost like the way I look at a lot of the healing path is like almost like a step case or staircase or what have you. And there's some early leaps people can make. And sometimes you get stuck in the middle of the flight of stairs, like you can see like 10 steps still up to go, and you're like, how do I get up there? And it's very challenging for people who are unwell or have chronic illnesses. And so you're saying that, in a scenario like that, the shift to come in and do some of this really more transformative work, so that the steps that were ahead of them can now start to work.
Yes. Yep. Exactly. And we do have a whole host of diagnostics here. So if that's also a struggle to find autonomic testing in your community, we have that here. If people are struggling to get an EDS evaluation or diagnosis, we do skin biopsies for small fiber neuropathy, alpha-synuclein, and amyloid deposition. If people, Dr. Squires also she can do a manual craniocervical instability test. So some of these other things, we also do some of the other treatments. We have these electrostimulation or neuromodulation suits that people can work in. We also have autologous exosomes, which would require at least a 2-week stay, or at least we have to harvest and send them off, and then they culture and cultivate them, and then we'd have to get them back. But, people can come back for subsequent treatments, and we can do those. So we have all of these custom treatments, vagal nerve stimulation.
So, yeah, I mean, it had to get to a point where you yourself saw a big need for these interventions to be offered and available. Like, can you talk about that? Like, were you frustrated yourself as a clinician, like where you were kind of hitting the wall with not being able to go further, and patients were getting frustrated, and is that how this blossomed?
I think I have seen a lot of the patients by the time they find, so all of this started because I wanted to practice Ayurvedic medicine, and nobody picks Ayurveda first.
Right.
Country, people have to really suffer and feel like they've tried 1,000 things before they'll even consider the word Ayurveda, let alone what the treatments are, especially if it includes enemas. And so that's kind of how I got into the complex and chronic health components. And it's also that Western medicine works really well for like a UTI to take macrobid. And I use that. And so
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of conditions, and for any kind of trauma, any kind of, car accident or broken bone, or, and our cancer treatments are, we have very advanced cancer treatments. And so there's it was really looking at where Ayurveda was going to be most helpful as a starting place into our healthcare system, that drove me to work with these patients. And when I started to see patients, I was struck by how many people brought me like, hundreds and hundreds of pages of documents of clinicians that they'd seen. And especially a lot of the ME/CFS, or myalgic encephalomyelitis, chronic fatigue patients, they've seen 20 to 50 doctors. They've tried for decades. And so here they are coming to me with a disease that has set in for 30 years. Like, how can I actually impact that?
Mm-hmm.
And so I really had to go back to my Ayurvedic training to look at, okay, how do we develop and cultivate neuroplasticity?
Yeah, and that's what's so fascinating about you, because um, you know, from a 20,000-foot view, you could just look at, oh, these are all these, sort of modalities that we're kind of seeing the latest and greatest,
Yeah.
of longevity medicine, and you could go to like conferences and hear about them, and
Mhm.
they're really well talked about. But the fact that it's it's stems from your core philosophy, that you started to kind of piece this
Yeah.
all together, is what makes it so fascinating. It's not just you're dabbling in all these different modalities. It's like Ayurvedic medicine is the core, and these are
Yes.
supporting that philosophy. Can you take one example of one of these modalities and how it links up with Ayurvedic medicine? Not necessarily, I'm obviously the Pancha Karma, but like take plasmapheresis, for example.
Mm-hmm. So, what's really fascinating about plasmapheresis is that the removal of blood has a Sanskrit name, and it's called Raktamoksha. And that is one of the five activities of detoxification. So, Pancha meaning five, Karma meaning actions. Those five actions are Vamana, which is vomiting, which we don't do a ton in this country, but sometimes with really heavy kapha patients, like solid patients, that is an option, but we don't do it a lot. There's Nasya that I talked about with the nasal oil. There is Varechana, which is a castor oil, and that what castor oil does. There's Basti, which is the enemas, and there's Rakta Moksha. And yes, when we pull out, so bloodletting, traditionally done with leeches, has been done in almost every culture
Yeah.
in the world. There was a period with Dr. Benjamin Rush in the late 1700s, like Ben Franklin times in Philadelphia. Benjamin Rush, he miscalculated how much blood there was in the body, which is part of what might have actually killed George Washington. But bloodletting. So I'm not supporting that. But just to say that there's this very long history. And when you look at the history of plasmapheresis, removing products from the blood goes back to Ayurveda. Rakta Moksha is right there. So as I've gotten further along in kind of even beyond the functional medicine, but the cutting edge of neurology and rheumatology and immunology in this country, the closer and closer it gets to Ayurvedic medicine.
Wow. That's when are you going to write a book on that?
I know. When I have time, I've been trying to write a book for about 8 years on
Yeah.
like 8 insights from Ayurveda to deepen a functional medicine or an integrative medicine practice or
Yeah.
Western medicine practice. And yeah.
I mean, it really helps to connect the dots like that, because then, you know, from a standpoint of, seeing a treatment flow and strategies and understanding, like, And, a lot of us naturopathic or functional providers do have at least some sense of understanding doshas and the basics of
Yeah.
like, what people might have basic imbalances you can detect. So it's, yeah, so I would love to learn more about those
Yeah.
connections. It's, that's fascinating. And so, are you, as part of your prescription to those modalities, and just like real briefly, because I know you have to
Mhm.
go soon, but the part of your prescriptions in putting together treatment recommendations for people, is it based on um, your understanding of their disease pattern plus dosha, that kind of
Always. I
amazing?
have now been doing Ayurveda, let's see, for officially more than half my life.
Wow.
And so I see everything through a doshic paradigm. And that includes the application of plasmapheresis and the application of stem cell therapies. But, I can really only see things through a doshic lens, an Ayurvedic paradigm lens. Um, and one of the things that I would say, there was something I was, I would say that's a little bit of how our clinic is a little bit unique. And, there's longevity clinics popping up everywhere, just as you said, where it's like all of these modalities just get clumped together under one roof. But I really feel like we have a unifying platform
Yeah.
from which we're working. So, for example, the original example I was going to give before you asked about the plasmapheresis was we have a patient. She's here for CRPS, chronic regional pain syndrome, which can be very difficult to treat. And she's had this for over 10 years, and she's been all over the world to different clinics and used a million different modalities and tools. And some of them helped a little bit, and a lot of them, including stem cells, made things worse.
Hmm.
But in our clinic, what I recognized was how much vata was imbalanced, and vata is very, very sensitive. And this person, she's been unable to get a massage for over 8 years. And we were able to have her complete an Ayurvedic massage with tuning fork and just marma points, with just marma pressure points, because we could tell that the vata was so high that you couldn't have too much stimulation, that we have to have things very easy and gentle,
Hmm.
because the disease is so deep. And part of this person's presentation or experience of the disease is this sensitivity.
Mm.
So in Ayurveda, we can only absorb and essentially accept what we can digest. We can only integrate and live what we can digest. And
Mm.
so if the digestion is very low, if that digestive fire is really low, then you can only do tiny bits at a time.
Mm.
Even if the disease is deep. If you go too heavy, it's kind of like, oh, you're a starving person who hasn't eaten in 4 days. I'm going to give you a huge, a bucket of macaroni and cheese. It's like that will not go well.
Right. Yeah. I was thinking like a bowl of chili or something like
Exactly.
that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We really have to think about like what is the level of digestion for the individual, and that's one of those concepts of how Ayurveda can shine a light on Western medicine. So I really do feel like not only do we have the tools here. I mean, I'm proud of our clinic. I'm proud of our clinicians. So sorry if I'm, I feel very humbly blessed to be working here.
Yeah.
Um, but it's like, I just feel like that is the beauty of being here, is that we understand that sometimes the best you can do for a person is actually help them navigate health insurance or navigate getting these, imaging done the right way, or, you know, getting this diagnostic testing done, getting these therapies completed.
What's
But
the
also,
greatest need? Yeah.
yeah, what does this person need to make all this happen?
Exactly. Yeah. That's so great. Well, I mean, having been to your clinic, um, I'd say like the energy is really
Yeah.
nice, and it's like total Seattle vibe there. You can't get much more Seattle than
Here on the Lake Union with the
yeah, it's
water,
on the
right
lake
on the water's edge. Yeah.
and the Space Needle, and you got the whole thing.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
boats, you got. I mean, it's just so
Yeah.
special. So,
Yeah.
well, congratulations. This was really great, and
Thank
I
you.
I think this helped me, and then also just I think for people who um, are needing someone that understands like all the different levels of the chronic space, and then to not just be thrown therapies at them, but to understand how they're going to support their particular individual situation is,
Mhm.
I mean, I think a lot of, as on the other side of things, as patients, when our practitioner can tell us why this is being selected and what the strategy is and why this is good for us, and then it connects, I think that really makes the therapy more potent, like
Yes. Yes,
in a good
absolutely.
way. Like,
Yep. Yep. Yeah. Thank
so,
you.
well, any closing thoughts that you'd like to leave us with before we wrap up today?
This was so fun to have this conversation.
Thank
I really appreciate you having me come on, and it's been really fun. Um, and I'm glad for the opportunity to share what we're doing. And, please come back. You're welcome back anytime. And if folks want to sign up for our newsletter, see, this is the part of the business I'm not that great at, but we are putting together more education in the upcoming kind of like weeks and months and years. So you go to Neuroveda Health, Neuroveda Health, HEALTH.com, and sign up for our newsletter so you know what's going on, because more and more is coming down the pike.
Excellent. Well,
And again,
thank you.
thanks for having
You're
me.
welcome. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of the One Thing Podcast. Please share these episodes with your friends, loved ones, colleagues, patients, healthcare providers, anyone who you feel might benefit from hearing these informative interviews. We tend to learn best from people sharing things with us. That's often the first time it's introduced. So don't hesitate if the content of these episodes reminded you of someone that might benefit from it. Forward the episode to them, and I'm sure they'll either appreciate it or be appreciative that you've thought of them. So once again, we'll look forward to seeing you next episode on the One Thing Podcast. And again, much appreciation for you being here.